and we are very honored that you would take some time out of your weekend to spend with us talking about one of our favorite topics, which is kitchen medicine. And today our hope is just to talk a little bit about individual herbs and plants and recipes, but moreover to think about kind of the philosophy of kitchen medicine and seeing home herbalism as a really practical and accessible and affordable and potent approach to herbal medicine. And to just talk about what it looks like when I get sick, when Maggie gets sick, when our families get sick, how these plants show up for us, so that you all can get some illness touches our lives or just our daily routine. In our sphere and in our close proximity, and how we can call upon them for healing. So I'd like to say wax poetic a little bit about this part of herbalism and some of our favorite tools on this topic, and then leave some time at the end just for questions. And of course, if a question is rising up for you as Maggie and I are sharing, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And otherwise, we'll leave some time at the end to share questions and answers. And so we'll start with just a little bit of introduction to ourselves, Maggie and I. My name's Emily Ruff. I'm coming to you today from unceded Abenaki territory, which is sometimes called in colonial times Central Vermont. I'm here at Sage Mountain Botanical Sanctuary, which was the home and teaching center of my mentor and herbal fairy godmother, Rosemary Gladstar, for about 3 decades. And just a few years ago, I relocated from the swamps of Central Florida to come up here to the Vermont area to steward the 600 acres that we have here and the 2,000 or so plant species, as well as all the other four-legged and winged creatures that call this land home and are so gracious as to allow me to cohabitate with them. And I teach some classes up here in addition to my conservation work at Sage, but I also was one of the co-founders of the School of Holistic Living down in Florida and continue to have the great blessing of working alongside Maggie and Mila and Debbie and Chris and Shannon and our wonderful team of teachers and offering some classes through the Florida School like this one today. And I'm super honored to have my dear friend and comrade Maggie O'Halloran with me here also today. Welcome, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Emily. It is a pleasure to be here. It is always really wonderful to hang out and talk plants with you. I'm really honored to be here and participate in that. So I am zooming in from the swampy area that Emily left, now called Orlando, Florida. I've been here for a while, really enjoying and getting to know the plants. I'm not originally from here, and it's really lovely to get a chance to engage with this landscape, especially when it's, the middle of January and I'm talking to friends in negative 20-degree weather, and I can be outside making myself feel better just by putting my hands in the dirt. It's pretty incredible to be able to do that here. I don't know if you can tell, but I am also getting a chance to make use of all my wonderful kitchen medicine. I'm a little under the weather, and so I look forward to being here and checking out the chat box and engaging with this topic that is really real for me right now. It's a personal experience for me and members of my household, and I really enjoy getting the opportunity to focus so much on what the plants are doing in my life here, as well as sharing with you some stories and experiences in my time here, working with the Florida School of Holistic Living and as a community herbalist and participant in supporting the running of the school, as well as teaching the roots and family and engaging with our community by supporting other teachers who we are honored to have here as well. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Maggie. And I want to send a quick welcome to all the folks that are watching this on the recording, as well as the folks that are joining us here live today. And for all of you, we will be sending out the replay of this tomorrow. So if you want to jump back into any of the topics or catch any of the herbs that we might discuss, you'll have access to this as well. So Maggie and I are both clinical herbalists, and we've been working as home herbalists and community herbalists and with clients and doing consultations and making medicines and talking plant chemistry and anatomy and physiology for the better part of 2 decades. And one of the reasons that I was so excited to gather together today and talk about kitchen medicine is because this topic for me is sort of what I see as like the gateway herbs of herbal medicine. Like these are those, and some of you know that term from other contexts, so I appreciate the joke being received. But I love thinking about ginger and garlic and cayenne and thyme and rosemary and all these herbs that are always in our spice cabinet being a conduit for us to introduce the practice of herbal medicine to folks that may feel a little bit intimidated when I talk about Tulsi or ashwagandha or astragalus or schizandra or all these herbs from faraway places that aren't familiar words and we don't know how to pronounce them and we don't know what they look like. Kitchen medicine is something that's really familiar. And for me, that is a sense of comfort, knowing these herbs like gives me a sense of home and my mom and my grandma and my, kitchen and the hearth. And just that alone is sort of like an emotional medicine for me when times are feeling uneasy or if I'm starting to get sick. So I appreciate those of you that are watching today that are totally new to the discussion of herbal medicine, because I feel like these are the first plants that we have the opportunity to give some attention to and to learn from and to learn with, because for many of us, they're already in our spice cabinet. And I also was equally excited about bringing forth this conversation in a community of students, many of you who have studied with Maggie and I for months or years, or with other teachers, and you're already really steeped into the practice of herbal medicine. You are the seasoned herbalists on our call today. I really appreciate bringing forth these herbs that are already so accessible to us and being able to remind us that we may know all this complicated phytochemistry, and we may know how to make triple extractions of medicines and know all these complicated formulas and all this in-depth anatomy and physiology. And we can also still lean on these really simple tools and plants and remedies to bring health to our family. And so many times my students, as they get more advanced in their studies, and even myself, as I was an early herbalist, I would sometimes overcomplicate things for myself and forget that those very basic, simple lessons that I learned early on in my path as an herbalist are still there for me and still accessible and still available. And so, like, as Maggie said, she's practicing these techniques and using these plants right now today in her household with her and her family. And these are the very things that I practice when I start to get under the weather. These are the first, like, I think about herbal medicine like in concentric rings. And these are the first rings that the first ring of herbs I reach for, because they are the closest. They're already in my kitchen cabinet. They're already in my backyard garden when it's not covered with 4 feet of snow. They're already, in the grocery store, at the market, at the farmer's market, at the supermarket. Like when I used to travel a lot more than I do now, I could find these remedies, even if I was in the middle of podunk nowhere and they had never heard of an apothecary, much less had one within an hour's drive. I could still find so many of these medicines at even the most basic and simple of grocery stores. So that's part of why I'm really excited for us to have this discussion today, because I know a lot of you are brand new to herbalism and this might be your first herbal class, but I also know a lot of you on the call today are seasoned herbalists and have used herbs possibly longer than I have. And I think these reminders of this medicine that's so close at hand to us and so accessible and affordable and also effective is just why I'm really jazzed to be here today. So that's sort of a little intro for us. And so one of the things that I wanted to think about with Maggie today and share a little bit from our personal experiences, what does it look like in our home when we fall ill, when someone in our family brings home the cooties? How does the practice of kitchen medicine get applied? in our home. And Maggie, I know you have a lot of thoughts to share on this today and this week because of what's happening in your household.
Yeah. So I feel like kitchen medicine in my house looks like knowing that there are always going to be cooties out there. So really incorporating plants that I know have all those antimicrobial qualities into our food and a regular, our daily life. When we have things like, whatever I'm experiencing now in someone in our home, then I'm just adding more of those things to things, or making a tea that incorporates ginger from my spice cabinet in a stronger way than I might in my regular life. It might mean that I'm reaching to those herbs that are in my spice cabinet in a heavier way. I might really be focusing on thyme in such a way that I'm making a tea out of that thyme instead of simply incorporating it into my soup or something like that. It also means that I'm really getting a chance to teach the other people in my life, our son who's now 11, my dear partner in life, husband, who don't really identify as herbalists, but they can definitely get behind a nice soothing cup of tea or soup when they're not feeling well or on any other day. So for me, it just looks like being aware of the potential medicinal qualities of my spice cabinet and sharing that with the folks in my life. How about you, Emily?
Well, many of the similar ways, Maggie. I love thinking about things like ginger that many of us may already enjoy as a tea, and preparing that with a greater concentration, a bigger ratio of herbs to water when it is something that we're trying to chase off the cooties with and make a little more medicinal than just a beverage. And I also really appreciate thinking about herbs that we use as culinary spices and thinking about ways that we can draw them in as medicine through something as a simple preparation like a tea. Those of you that are already herbalists practicing on the call know about elixirs and syrups and tinctures, and there's all sorts of extracts and ways that we can make medicine, and we talk about those a lot, Maggie and I do, in our classes. But sometimes when we're looking at first aid, when we're looking at first line of defense, we might not have 6 weeks to wait on a macerated tincture, or we might not have the energy, if we're the ones under the weather, to think about pulling out a percolation cone and making a 24-hour percolation. But a tea is something instant that, we just need a pot of boiling water and a strainer, and there we go, we have some medicine. And so I love thinking about teas for medicine that I, as an herbalist now, probably make them more as a beverage too. But at first I didn't. Things like thyme, things like oregano, things like sage, things like rosemary. We don't necessarily think of those as a beverage or as a tea, but when we're under the weather, it immediately makes really good medicine for us. And, I think in this day and age, most of us tuned in today are acutely aware of the pathogens that are surrounding us in the environment outside of our home. And sometimes to an alarming, somewhat obsessive rate, I can speak for myself to say I'm constantly leaving my bubble and thinking about the fact that there are lots and lots and lots of bacteria and viruses and pathogens in the environment. And those of you that are herbalists already know that it is so much easier for us to prevent illness than it is to treat illness. So I think of kitchen medicine, and I think about things like ginger and garlic and cayenne and lemons and all these herbs in our spice cabinet as things to dose in a heavy-handed way, just for the fact that we're walking through the world that has a lot of cooties in it and we don't want to bring them home. So for me, that looks like using more garlic in my cooking. It looks like pickling some garlic when I harvest it fresh from my garden, so that all winter long I can be having a little serving of it on the side of my savory dishes. I am up in Vermont right now, but I had the good fortune of being in Florida a month or two ago, and a friend's lemon tree was just bursting with fruit. And so I hauled home a bushel, and every single day I have a big glass of water, as I usually do. But for the last 6, 8 weeks since I've been in Florida, it has a hearty wedge of lemon in it. And I feel like these practices are the daily tools that I can use to keep my immune system healthy. And then I just expand on those and enhance those and increase those when there's a possibility that I'm starting to feel that first tickle of a throat, that first sniffle in my nose, that first sign of an illness. But even when I'm, in the throes of illness a little bit more, being able to call upon those herbs. I think about, we think a lot in kitchen medicine about the cooties and our immune system and pathogens and colds and flus, but there's other ways that we can work with kitchen medicine too. Like, for instance, I got a really intense paper cut a couple of weeks ago. And it's so amazing how a tiny thin piece of paper can just be like a dagger in your hand when you don't realize what's going on. And mine wouldn't stop bleeding. And it was also a piece of paper from the mail. And so I didn't know like where it had traveled or what cooties it might be bringing in. And so I used powdered cayenne as a styptic. There's lots of cayennes in the basement in my apothecary. Those of you that know me as an herbalist or know Sage Mountain, I inherited a lot of Rosemary's apothecary. I have this ridiculous, like over the top apothecary to brag about, but I don't go downstairs to use it if I have something in my kitchen cabinet that I can use instead. And so I grabbed the cayenne and I sprinkled it on my hand to get the bleeding to stop, and also to, act as a disinfectant a bit for any cooties that might have transferred into that cut. Similarly, last week I had an ongoing long-standing dental thing that is just sort of, several dentists and surgeons, their approach is just do your best, manage it, wait it out. There's not a lot that we can do for it right now. And it's usually fine, but occasionally it flares up, and it did a couple last week or so. And the first thing I did was I reached for the cloves in my spice cabinet, and I made a really strong tea, and I sort of washed with it like a mouthwash, held it, sipped on it a little bit, used that to help with the pain that I was dealing with, and it was really effective. So of course, I think Maggie and I are probably going to talk a lot about colds and flus and coughs and immune system health, because kitchen medicine is really seeded for supporting those types of illnesses. But there's also other ways that these herbs can be brought into our routine. So those are just a couple, examples here. But certainly if my partner and I are, heading out into the great big world of, Burlington, a city of all of 40,000 people, kind of small in comparison to the big cities where you all come from. But if we're venturing out of our little tiny town of 1,000 people and, commingling with the muggles out there, then I usually make us a nice tea to take with us, or, make a little bit extra ginger, put a little bit of extra hot sauce or garlic in our food, just to kind of as a protective. But then certainly if we start to get more properly under the weather, we reach those tools as well.
Yeah, it's really awesome to have such great access to all those wonderful plants that you're talking about. And even if you're not growing garlic yourself, there are ways to access it fresh in a clove, and you can take them apart and put them into vinegar. And it can be really lovely way to have access to that fresh garlic throughout the year. There was a really great question in the comments specifically about incorporating something like garlic in your daily life. And the question, I think, comes from this place of understanding that there are some herbs that we don't want to use every day because their impact on the body, either the body will get accustomed to it, or accustomed to whatever action they have in the body. So the question was, are items like garlic still as effective when we're sick if they're used normally, or have it on the regular? Or would we be better off not having it regularly and only having it when we need it? And this is such a great question because much like the plants, there is a variety of constituents that each individual plants have. So we're thinking about an action like antimicrobial or cootie fighting, to use that more technical term. We're really thinking about the action that plant has in all the time. That's just what it does. It has that action, and it doesn't either increase or decrease depending on how often it's exposed to your body. It's just something a quality that that plant has. So in the case of garlic, it doesn't really matter. I think when Emily and I are talking about having more of it because we are either fighting something or are thinking about fighting something, it's not really going to have the same, like, I'm not going to use the same kind of caution about having garlic in my regular everyday life, but having more of it whenever I'm fighting something means that I'm just taking in more of that antimicrobial qualities, like maybe eating some of that garlic cloves directly from my apple cider vinegar instead of incorporating it in my food. This is such a great question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about, some specific herbs that come to mind, like echinacea or golden seal or osha. Those are the types of herbs that, it's not like we take them every day to like go out in the world and protect ourselves. We really reserve those herbs because of the effects that they have on the body for when we're sick. And, I think echinacea is a great example. It's one of those plants that folks that aren't necessarily well versed in herbalism, but see the token herb shelf at like Walgreens or drugstore or GNC, and they're like, oh, it says it's for immune system, I should take it every day. Well, not necessarily. It's not necessarily going to support our immune health. It could actually have a opposite effect. Whereas something like garlic, like Maggie said, having some of that garlic infused vinegar on our salads or dressing a meal or something like that in a culinary sense. But when, we're starting to feel under the weather, or when my partner brings home the cooties and I want to stay as well as possible so that I can caretake him, then I go from drizzling that vinegar on my salad to putting a shot of it in a small glass of water and just chugging it back. Right. So it's sort of like increasing the dose or the frequency of that time. But for most of the herbs that Maggie and I have spoken to, having that little bit in a culinary sense, in a flavor sense, in a sort of maintenance sense, I think is actually a great way for us to stay healthy, and then increasing the dose or increasing the frequency in those periods where we are specifically exposed to something and trying to prevent illness or are starting to come down with something and want to shorten the duration of our recovery time and get better as quickly as possible. I think dose and frequency. So I'm a proponent of thinking about this conversation of kitchen medicine and hoping that it inspires you all not just to think about tools that you can reach for when your loved one is sick, but also medicines that you can start to incorporate a little bit more every day to boost your body's ability to fight off the cooties, as we like to say so technically here in our classes. So that's a great question. I appreciate you bringing that up. And I'll just add to that I, as an herbalist, am really passionate about plant medicine being the medicine of the people, because it always has been. And we have a birthright, we have an ancestral right to being connected to the earth and being supported by the earth. And the system of capitalism that we all live within really puts barriers sometimes to access to healthcare in a modern sense and in a holistic sense as well. And I don't think my vision of herbalism is not teaching people how to buy overpriced, overhyped, overpackaged medicines at an upscale health food store, but it's learning how we can support our health and our family's health in a way that's affordable and accessible and meaningful and effective. And so the conversation around kitchen medicine for me is really highlights that, because most of us can grow these things in our garden, and we may already, even if our garden is just the sunny windowsill of the apartment or the studio that we're in. We don't have to have a big food plot to grow a beautiful rosemary plant that we can use when we are feeling the sniffles or feeling a sore throat or our belly is upset. And similarly, these are medicines that we can find in the produce section and even the spice cabinets, the jars. There's a larger conversation about quality and organics and spectrum of freshness and all of that aside, even my clients who I've served in different community clinics that, you know, are limited through food stamps to the budget that they have every month. Like I would rather them get a bottle of McCormick's Thyme that's the cheap, or the generic brand from the grocery store that's dried and super cheap, like then, you know, that's going to be still effective. We don't have to, we can think what the ideal is and we can strive for that, but also we have to think about what is practical and what's accessible and within our reach. And so I know for Maggie and I both, that's, you know, a big emphasis from what we talked about our students in our family and community herbalism class regularly, is how we don't have to save up all our pennies to try to afford one little like fancy packaged bottle of something from a health food store, but we can really look to these more simple medicines because they are just as effective. So I just wanted to mention that because I know that's relevant for a lot of you, and a lot of you also work in communities where I think that's a really relevant concept too.
Yeah, having access. It's such a relevant part of why we're so focused on this idea of kitchen medicine, because so many of these plants have been used for a long period of time, you know, eons and eons in cooking. A lot of our culinary herbs became culinary herbs because folks knew that they had these antimicrobial qualities to them. So part of the reason we have spice in food is to keep that food preserved. And being able to bring that access to everybody is such a relevant part of what we want to do as a school. And that access part of herbalism, it wasn't that long ago that everyone had access to the knowledge. And so being able to remember what's in the herb cabinet is part of herbalism, is an important part of that remembering.
Yeah. And I think also about accessibility when I'm under the weather. Like the last time that I had an upper respiratory infection, I was a little bit feverish. I was sniffly and stuffy and coughing and just, you know, felt crummy. And I am a very poor patient when I'm under the weather. I sort of like forget all my tools and skills and bravery, and I'm just a total baby. And especially if I am, you know, if my partner's out of town or not around, or for those of us that, you know, live by ourselves, like we might not have the energy to like concoct something really fancy and complicated. So that's also why I really value knowing the medicinal potential of the plants that are already in our kitchen, because last time I had an upper respiratory infection, there was no way I was getting in a car and driving to an herb store to get, you know, this ingredient or that ingredient. Like it was all I could barely do to like drag myself in the kitchen and like bleary-eyed pull down a couple of herbs and throw them in a pot of hot water and start sipping on it. So I think that's really important to think about too, in terms of access. When we're the ones under the weather, it needs to be something within reach and something simple for us to prepare. So yeah, so I think about that a lot. I also think about kitchen medicine as something that's totally fun. And one of my teachers is actually here on the call with us today, herbalist Susan Belsinger, who some of you know by her many books and teachings. She's part of the Herb Society of America and part of their Herb of the Year publications every year, among lots of other beautiful books and things that Susan teaches and has authored. And, you know, Susan, like many herbalists, really reminds us how much fun herbalism can and should be, and bringing these plants into our practice of medicine, and not just sprinkling a little bit of, you know, seasoning on top of our food, but like really engaging our senses and delighting our senses. You know, I think, I don't know about if I can speak for all of you, but I know for me, it's been a very difficult last 2 years, personally and collectively. And I am hungry for ways that I can bring delight into my daily life. And sometimes it's harder than others. But when I reach into my spice cabinet and I'm thinking about what I'm going to make for dinner, or thinking about how I'm going to care for my family's health, certainly the beauty of the aroma and the color and the flavor of these plants that we're talking about here today day is one way to really just kind of awaken something inside myself, give myself a little bit of the soul medicine as well as the, the body medicine that these plants can bring. So, having fun with these plants as we're thinking about our food and how that little bit of extra garlic or cayenne can really spice things up for our taste buds and also for our spirit and our heart. But also, like, we can involve our family and friends. Like, Maggie mentioned that her son and partner are very receptive to a warm cup of tea when they're under the weather. But I also have seen her budding herbalist, 11 years old, like, get there in the kitchen experimenting with her and making things and having fun. And so there's a lot of ways that this sort of sensory, hands-on kitchen medicine experience can also take a beautiful life of being something that is rewarding for us. And it's not just like, tinctures have their place. I don't mean to dismiss or downplay them at all, but it's a lot more fun to like have something that's tasty and that I'm, getting my hands messy with as I'm making it, as opposed to just swigging back something. So the fun aspect of kitchen medicine, I think, is something to highlight too.
Yeah, I think it's so fun to get into the kitchen. And if anyone who's ever taken a class with me in the kitchen understands that the kitchen is where I like to have fun. I'm not a great baker. I don't like having the limits on like exacting amounts. So being able to cook things is where I really love to nurture and nourish myself and my family. So the biggest challenge of teaching a class for my kitchen is being able to know the amounts, because I get into it. I was raised in South Louisiana, where food is its own kind of medicine, and connecting people through food is its own kind of medicine. And it's definitely something that I do to take care of myself. I know that I'm in a good place and I'm doing well if I'm cooking for myself. And I was talking to another really dear friend of mine recently, and she was saying that, when I'm not doing so well in my heart, it's when I really go to the kitchen and I take care of myself by making myself something good to eat. And so bringing that nourishing quality, that fun quality of being able to go into the kitchen and smell the herbs and work with the plants that either I'm growing or friends have given me, or I've found at a local farmer's market or in my local Kroger, it may be from the grocery store. And it's the way that I'm able to nourish myself in a time when I'm focused on the cooties in a way that I've never really been focused on cooties, even as an herbalist in my life, as a way to really have fun and get connected with those plants in this fun way of chopping up the vegetables and throwing them together and making my house smell amazing, and no longer inviting people into my house off the street from my neighborhood for food, but being able to bring those jars of food to my neighbors if they're not feeling well, or out into the front yard, and being able to have a potluck in the yard so that we're still keeping our goodies to ourselves. Having knowledge of how the herbs in my spice cabinet are both filling my emotional support as well as my physical body. It can be really fun just to have that in my mind and work with those plants in this way that can inspire people and let them know that they're being cared for. It's really incredible.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate it. I've heard you say that before, Maggie, going into the kitchen to take care of yourself, that this practice is a medicine of its own, like nourishing ourselves and creating something. A lot of us are not painters and not sculptors and not musicians, but our art comes by creating something else with our hands that then nourishes our bellies and our bodies and our hearts. So it's really beautiful to think about.
Yeah, I really honor, admire all of my loved ones and people I care about that are able to create things with their hands that you can look at, the artists out there. But it's really in the kitchen that I feel like I feel the most creative and have a good time. There's a question in the chat box that is so relevant to what we're talking about. If you've ever taken a class with Emily or I, we talk about the value of wild plants nearby, or food that you grow yourself and their nutrient content. And I mentioned picking up the herbs or the food from Kroger because I don't always have access to those wonderful, wild, nourishing foods that speak to my heart and my soul in a different way because I'm able to connect with the land that they're growing on. And if I'm, visiting family somewhere and we go to the grocery store and I get an opportunity to show them that these vegetables or these fruits or these herbs can be really helpful if they're incorporated into their kitchen and taste really good. I think that does speak to me in a way that wild plants do, because I'm sharing that with someone who may not be into that wild plant walk with me and nibbling from the ground. But it's a step closer to that by just connecting with plants instead of having plants in this purely consumer role. So thank you for asking that question. That's a really important question to think about.
Yeah, I think I've seen it at herb stores. I've seen it at grocery stores. The moment that we open our awareness to the relationship that we have with plants, then it's not just those that still have their roots in the ground and are stretching towards the sky that can speak to us. And I think even I will wager to say we might not even have our awareness open yet to that relationship. The plants are still speaking to us, even if we have our ears and our mind closed a little bit. The plants still are reaching for us and, engaging and communicating with us. And what that might look like is feeling under the weather, or having a family member at home that is, and heading to the grocery store and sitting in the produce section or staring at the spices in the spice aisle, and letting our intuition guide us, letting that's a form of this plant relationship. That's still the plants communicating to us, even if they were dried months ago and are in these little jars. Like the consciousness of the plants, just like the medicine of the plants, just like the phytochemistry of the plants, still comes through in those dried herbs. And so I think I appreciate that question, Sandra. Thank you. We just have a few more minutes. And so I wanted to offer, if you want to drop in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and share a question, we'd be happy to receive those. You also are welcome to email us at the school. I'll leave the email in the chat here. It's info@holisticlivingschool.org. If you hop off the call and you're in your kitchen later on and you're like, I have this burning desire to know about thyme, or what is your thoughts on this? Feel free to email us. And again, feel free to unmute yourself or drop any other questions in the chat. And while your mind is gathering those, I'll just mention quickly that we offered this discussion kind of as an introduction to our upcoming series that starts on January 20th called Kitchen Medicine. And over 8 weeks, Maggie and myself and 3 other amazing herbalists, Christina, Wilnice, and Shay, will be talking about 10 plants from our kitchen counter, spice cabinet, backyard garden, and diving into each one with recipes and more of their medicinal benefits and their folklore and history and all sorts of juicy goodness. And so we're happy to stick around and answer some questions about that too. But looks like we have a couple good questions in the chat. Our first, black pepper turmeric shots, and how often should you take them? So I'll jump in on this one. Turmeric is a member of the same plant family as ginger, Zingiberaceae. My father was a botany professor, so if you take a class with me, you know that I'll spout off those binomial names all day long. And it's a beautiful tropical herb that those of you in the South hopefully grow a little bit of in your garden. I have a pathetic but attempt to, really trying little turmeric and ginger garden up here indoors in Vermont that is really a valiant effort, those brave little herbs here in my zone 3. But the root or the rhizome, more properly, of turmeric has some incredible uses for the circulatory system. It's a specific herb for the liver. It's super hepatoprotective. It protects the cells of the liver. It helps them regenerate when they're damaged, whether the damage is from stress, whether the damage is from pharmaceuticals, whether the damage is from having too much fun in college. It helps repair the liver. And it's also an anti-inflammatory, a systemic anti-inflammatory. So it can work on both acute inflammation that comes from injuries or infections, but also the chronic inflammation that comes from stress, that comes from diet, that comes from living in 2022 in North America. And so it's an herb actually that I been enjoying a lot of, juiced or as a tea or in other ways through the winter time to support my liver and also the inflammatory load that I know that I took on when I started to eat all those yummy holiday foods a couple of weeks ago and indulged. And it's combined with black pepper because a chemical called piperine in the black pepper helps our body absorb a chemical called curcumin in the turmeric. So it's a synergistic relationship. We get more benefit from turmeric when we combine it with the black pepper. So whether you're making it as a like chai like hot beverage, or you're having juiced shots, or somewhere in between, the turmeric and the black pepper together are really fabulous pairing. And Nina asked about garlic being more potent stored in vinegar rather than fermented in honey. I will say that, broadly speaking, and a phytochemist may give you a little bit more specifics, Nina, about allicin and sulfuric compounds and, details of this nature. But my very practical folk herbalist answer, and I'll let Maggie chime in with any differences she may have of opinion here. My answer is the way to prepare garlic that's the most potent is the way that our family will take it the most frequently and often and in the biggest dose, right? So vegans, I'm not going to ferment garlic and honey for them because they're not going to use that preparation. But some of my family members just have like an allergic type aversion to vinegar. They're not really allergic, but just like the smell of a drop of it in any dish. And they're like, you put vinegar in that, didn't you? I don't want that. So I think that I make a lot of garlic in the fall, getting ready for winter. I put a lot of it up in vinegar. I put a lot of it up in honey. I make all sorts of, preparations with it. I dry some, I roast some and freeze that. Someone earlier asked about freezing garlic. I don't freeze it unless I roast it, but there may be other paths to do that. I don't freeze it raw usually, but my folk herbalist answer to that, Nina, is that the preparation that's going to get the most use, both maintenance doses and when we're under the weather, is the preparation that I would lean towards. Maggie, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think I agree with you on all of the things. I think garlic in the way that the person will consume it is great. Also, Guido Masse wrote a little bit about how garlic, a lot of the qualities that we're really looking for in garlic are once it's gone through a little bit of a chemical change. So peeling it and cutting it up a little bit, I was taught that your garlic, you always chop it up and you let it sort of come to life by leaving it chopped there for a few minutes before you cook it. And that sort of kitchen knowledge that was passed on to me actually has some phytochemical reasons for that. And it becomes available in the way, and as Emily said, it's a phytochemical activity that I don't fully understand. It's just sort of book knowledge that I have access to this information. And that it's my understanding that same sweetening of garlic that happens if you also chop your garlic and let it rest for a few minutes and get sweeter, also happens if you put it into vinegar. So when you hear me talking about garlic and storing it, I often store it in vinegar because it takes a little bit of the bite out of it. And it also gives it my body access to some of those phytochemicals that I'm trying to access already. And Emily mentioned having that vinegar available. So that's some medicine there. Or sometimes I just eat whole cloves and it's a little bit sweeter because it's been in the vinegar.
Yeah, I have a jar all the time like that, Maggie, that standing jar of cloves that the vinegar I'll cook with, I'll drizzle on things. I might take a shot, but then I also eat that pickled garlic, daily because I'm kind of a garlic head, but also especially more frequently when I'm feeling under the weather. We'll take one last question. I'm mindful of Maggie's time with us as she's in her healing process. Thank you, Maggie, for this being such a relevant topic for you to speak to today and for sharing from your heart and your home. And if we didn't get to your question, feel free to email us, or we'll also reach out and send you an update about our kitchen medicine series soon too, as well as the link to the replay. We'll send that out tomorrow, so feel free to reply to that. But there was one other question in the chat about herbs for cholesterol. And at the outset, I'll say that when I'm working with a client who's taking medication, I always work in concert with their doctor and with their blood work. We try to be really responsible herbalists, and herbalists that are truly holistic in nature, which means that we work with modern medicine, and there's no dogma. Like modern medicine, we all can agree has its faults, but we're also really lucky to have access to it, even if it has barriers in this country. So just at the outset, we don't, automatically rip someone off medication and say, here, take these herbs. But if with their pharmacist and their doctor and their blood work, there are some supportive herbs that we can work with, then we certainly do offer those opportunities, because a lot of times the herbs do have great benefit and may have fewer side effects. And cholesterol is an area where generally there are a lot of herbs that can really shine and support. I know my mother, for a long time, we were able to add herbs to her regimen that, she was sort of one of those patients that the doctor's like, if you come back next time and your reading still looks like this, then we're going to give you this pharmaceutical. And through herbs, we were able to, kind of stave that off for as long as it was healthy and safe to do so. And I will mention that there are so many of the herbs in our kitchen medicine and our spice cabinet that are brilliant herbs for the cardiovascular system, and specifically for helping balance cholesterol, especially LDL, that lousy cholesterol when it gets too high. So garlic and ginger and cayenne are three of the ones I think about first and foremost. And some of my clients that are just starting to creep up and see their numbers rise just by in their daily food intake, adding more garlic and ginger or cayenne, sometimes just that alone can assist. And I also am thinking back to Maggie, reminding us that these herbs didn't end up in our spice cabinet by mistake or by accident or by coincidence. These were the plants that helped preserve food. These were the plants that, if we were eating food that was questionably preserved, would help keep us from getting, belly upset. These were plants that, helped stave off cooties and vampires for generation upon generation, and pathogens too. So I just, want to really, I think, close by honoring and acknowledging all the, generations from cultures all over this planet that, have kept these teachings alive. And we may be in this sort of period of what I call the great forgetting. I don't really call it that. Lots of other authors call it that, but we've sort of disconnected and, forgotten to remember these teachings. But hopefully those of us on this call today and your kids and grandkids and neighbors and family and friends will be part of the great remembering and returning back to these very simple plants to keep ourselves healthy and happy and whole. So with that, I want to thank Maggie for braving it through healing to share from your home and healthier home every day forward from here. And I want to thank all of you for taking some time out of your Sunday afternoon to share with us. And please look forward to speaking with you again and staying connected. Hope to see you again real soon. And happy Sunday, happy week, and happy health to all of you. Many blessings.
Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to be here with us. And thank you, Emily, for bringing us all together. It's been a pleasure. I feel better already.